A store clerk is killed during a robbery in Tennessee. When the suspect claims it was an accident, police turn to forensic examiners to prove cold-blooded murder. 2 people are found brutally murdered in an Albany, New York boarding house. To capture the killer, investigators rely on 19th century technology. In Louisiana, a fisherman discovers the body of a murdered woman. A footprint left in blood is investigators' only clue to her killer's identity. When there are no witnesses to a murder, police must find other ways to solve their case. But unseen no longer means unobserved, and killers are finding themselves caught in the camera's eye. In this episode, some of the names have been changed. In the early morning hours of July 2nd, 1995, police in Chattanooga, Tennessee received a 911 call. A man had discovered the bullet-ridden body of a store clerk inside a local gas station convenience store. Investigators and forensic technicians from the Chattanooga Police Department responded to the scene. In the back storage room, detectives located the male victim. The manager later identified him as 34-year-old employee Lenny King. He had been shot in the arm and twice in the chest by a large caliber weapon that had been fired at close range. Investigators found handcuffs locked to the sink next to the victim's body. As technicians began processing the scene for evidence, they found bloodstains on the outside of the door leading into the storage room. Examiners determined that the blood had originated from the victim. The team next made their way into the service area of the store. The cash register and safe had been cleaned out. The homicide appeared to be the result of a robbery gone bad. The killer had made off with more than $2,000. But technicians were unable to locate any fingerprints left behind by the robber. Investigators hoped that the store's security cameras could provide some clues. When the manager played the surveillance tape, investigators realized the suspect had been caught on video entering the store. And as the manager watched images of the cash register and safe being cleaned out, he believed he recognized the robber. It looked like a former employee named Jason Rhodes. The manager pulled his files, looking for more information. According to employment records, the 22-year-old had only worked at the store for a few weeks. And the victim, Lenny King, had trained him. According to the manager, Lenny King was a well-liked and valued employee who treated everyone with kindness. But King had complained that Jason Rhodes was lazy and inattentive, and Jason didn't take the job very seriously. After his training period was over, Jason only showed up for work once and then quit. At the police station, detectives reviewed the surveillance video again. The tape, which consisted of a series of still photographs shot every 2 seconds, simultaneously displayed images from the store's 2 security cameras. As they watched the images frame by frame, they noticed that the suspect was brandishing what appeared to be a .357 revolver as he walked into the store. But a time and date stamp on the video obscured the image of the victim being approached by the gunman and forced into the storage room. And that room, where the victim was killed, was out of the camera's range. Investigators were able to print a clear image of the gunman. To confirm the killer's identity, police showed a photograph of the suspect to Jason Rhodes' father. Heartbroken by what he saw, Mr. Rhodes positively identified the man in the photo as his son. When asked if he knew his son's present whereabouts, the father said that Jason and his girlfriend, Sonia Altman, had left town the same day Lenny King was found murdered. Jason hadn't told his father why he was leaving, but he did say that he probably would not be coming home. Mr. Rhodes gave investigators a description of his son's truck. Police had positively identified Lenny King's killer. And based on the senselessness of the murder, Sergeant Rodney Bowman knew they needed to apprehend Jason Rhodes quickly.
Well, we're looking for a young man that definitely didn't have any value to life. We really at that time had no idea if he might be drug-induced or what his behavior was. All we knew is that this was a deliberate act. It appeared to be a deliberate act, and we needed to get this man off the street.
Detectives theorized that the suspect and his girlfriend would eventually contact their loved ones. They began tracing all the calls made to members of their families. Within hours, the tactic paid off. Jason's girlfriend, Sonia Altman, had contacted her grandmother, and the call was traced to a hotel in Nashville, Tennessee. Descriptions of the suspect, his girlfriend, and the vehicle they were traveling in were forwarded to the Nashville police. On the evening of July 3rd, Nashville authorities spotted Jason Rhodes' truck as it pulled into a gas station. As the suspect exited his vehicle to fill up, detectives moved in. Jason Rhodes was placed under arrest on suspicion of aggravated robbery and murder. His girlfriend, Sonia Altman, was also placed under arrest. Investigators began searching the suspect's vehicle. On the front seat, police found a money bag that contained several $100s in cash. Detectives also found a box of ammunition for a .357 handgun, the same type as the one used to murder Lenny King. The following day, Chattanooga police traveled to Nashville to question Jason Rhodes about the homicide. At first, he denied any knowledge of the crime. But when confronted with the evidence against him, he decided to cooperate. Jason admitted to killing Lenny King. But he said it was a horrible accident. He never intended to harm his former co-worker. According to Jason, he entered the store with the intent to commit robbery. He claimed that he brought the victim into the storage room in order to handcuff him to the sink, so he would be unable to trip any alarm devices. But as he attempted to get the cuffs around Lenny King's wrist, the store clerk fought back, grabbing for the gun.
He fell to the ground and he tried to grab the gun.
Several shots went off, and Jason realized that Lenny had been hit.
I didn't know what was going to happen.
Panicked, he grabbed the money and fled the scene. Though Jason Rhodes had confessed to killing Lenny King inside the storage room, investigators didn't believe the story. Blood found on the outside of the doorframe suggested that the victim had been shot well before the two entered the room and struggled. But unless investigators could prove that Jason Rhodes was lying, he would likely stand trial for a lesser manslaughter charge. Detectives were convinced Jason Rhodes was a cold-blooded killer. Now they needed to find proof to ensure that the young man would never be free to kill again. Police in Chattanooga, Tennessee had arrested the man responsible for the murder of 34-year-old store clerk Lenny King, shot to death during the commission of a robbery. After being caught on the store's surveillance video, Jason Rhodes admitted to the killing. But he claimed his gun had accidentally gone off as he and the victim struggled in the storage room. Detectives scrutinized the video frame by frame, looking for proof that Jason Rhodes was lying and that the murder had been premeditated. Then, in one of the frames, they noticed that the victim's knees appeared to buckle and he grabbed for his arm soon after Jason Rhodes entered the store. Homicide Detective Sergeant Tim Carroll theorized the suspect began shooting as soon as he walked in.
Once we got the video slowed down where we could see it, Sergeant Rodney Bowman and I both agreed that Jason Rhodes came in the store and shot from the get-go. It wasn't just going in the back of the storeroom and wrestling around and gun going off.
Investigators knew that if they could prove Jason Rhodes fired as soon as he entered the store, they could charge him with premeditated first-degree murder. But that would not be easy.
Where Jason Rhodes is positioned in the video, it's underneath all this date and time stamping. We can't see any muzzle flash, we can't see the weapon actually jerk. So our theory is we got to get this video enhanced where we can either eliminate the wording or can we see a muzzle flash.
Investigators turned to scientists at the U.S. Department of Energy's Oak Ridge National Laboratory. There, Ken Tobin heads the Image Science and Machine Vision Group. His expertise lies in analyzing video images in order to extract data that is not readily visible. He agreed to work the case.
The tape that we received from the Chattanooga Police Department was typical low quality. It had a split screen characteristic, which meant there were two video cameras that were in the actual store where the robbery took place. They were both displayed simultaneously on the camera. But the camera that actually caught the shooting of the store proprietor had him very far away. It was obscured by the time and date stamp, which was posted in the upper left-hand quadrant of the image, and it didn't look very possible to see anything new.
To confirm investigators' suspicions that Lenny King was fired upon before entering the back room, Tobin needed a clear image. First, he would have to remove the date and time stamp from the video. To do that, he applied computer software to the images as part of a process referred to as subtraction analysis. The analysis works by comparing each frame of video to the next, and then eliminating images that remain constant and unchanged throughout.
So the subtraction process in this case, the goal is to remove everything that's constant in the scene. The shelves, the coffee pot, the time and date stamp, which was superimposed over part of the image, and leave nothing but, for example, in this case, the muzzle flash itself and the recoil of the body, the person holding the gun as it was fired.
Through subtraction analysis, Tobin was able to capture a blip in the video that was previously obscured by the time and date stamp. And it appeared to be the muzzle flash from Jason Rhodes' gun. Tobin's analysis had brought investigators one step closer to proving that Jason Rhodes had entered the convenience store with the intent to kill Lenny King. But to win a first-degree murder conviction, they needed to be certain that the blip uncovered by Tobin's analysis was in fact a muzzle flash and not a glitch in the video itself. To find out, detectives returned to the convenience store to conduct their own experiment. Using the same .357 Magnum revolver used in the murder, they fired the weapon into old phone books, making certain to be in view of the store's surveillance cameras.
We fired it into like a couple of old city directories in that same corner area, but not in the same area where this time stamping was. So we fired several rounds and of course recorded on the store surveillance film, and then our crime scene people also videotaped it as well.
Likelihood that this is consistent with a
The video of the reconstruction was sent to Ken Tobin for a comparison with the one taken during the actual crime.
Now we have the firing here.
When he compared the muzzle flash from Sergeant Carroll's gun to the blip on the video taken at the time of the murder, he concluded they were consistent in shape and intensity.
When that flash is taking place.
Investigators now had the evidence they needed to prove that Jason Rhodes' story was a lie. And one isolated frame of video had been the difference in proving first-degree murder.
You pulled the trigger.
I would compare what Oak Ridge National Lab did on this one little section of video to one drop or hair of DNA. It was that crucial. Without what they did, we didn't have what I would consider the video DNA for this case.
To avoid the death penalty, Jason Rhodes, on the advice of his attorney, pled guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated murder. Police believe Jason Rhodes entered the store knowing he would kill the clerk who could identify him. After shooting him in the arm as he walked in, Rhodes forced Lenny King into the storage room. After a struggle for the gun, Jason shot the victim twice more in the chest at close range. He exited the back room and proceeded to rob the store of $2,000 in cash. Jason Rhodes was sentenced to life in prison. His girlfriend, Sonia Altman, was convicted of being an accessory after the fact and sentenced to 2 years in prison. Jason Rhodes' crime was exposed through state-of-the-art technology. But to solve a double murder in Albany, New York, investigators must rely on a 19th century invention. On the morning of July 3, 1994, Gary Lang went to check on his mother-in-law at a boarding house that she owned and operated. When he arrived, he noticed her stereo on the steps. The mail hadn't been collected, and the back door was wide open. Inside, the house was in shambles. Then, lying on the kitchen floor, he discovered the brutally beaten bodies of his 86-year-old mother-in-law, Josephine Zurich, and a tenant, Walter Peskowski. Investigators from the Albany Police Department rushed to the home. Police technicians carefully documented the entire house. Blood and debris were everywhere. Detective Anthony Bruno was shocked by what he saw.
The house looked literally as if someone had picked it up and shaken it and set it back down. I don't think, aside from the kitchen table, there was a piece of furniture that wasn't turned over. There wasn't a drawer that hadn't been pulled out and emptied, thrown on the floor. The kitchen itself was covered in blood. There was nowhere to walk on the kitchen floor without stepping in blood.
The blood stain patterns found throughout the kitchen were consistent with having been caused by blunt force trauma injuries. And it was likely that a cane with a bloody handle found on the floor was the weapon used to bludgeon the elderly victims. As investigators struggled to find evidence that could point them toward the killer, they uncovered another possible weapon. On top of the kitchen table, they found a cooking pot, dented and stained with blood. For investigators, all of the evidence suggested that the two victims had unwittingly stumbled upon a robbery in progress. And it appeared that the killer or killers had left in a hurry. Autopsies confirmed that both victims had died as a result of massive blunt force trauma to the head. 55-year-old Walter Paskowski had also been strangled. Each of the victims had been struck dozens of times, and the injuries were consistent with having been caused by both the cane and the pot found in the kitchen. The medical examiner determined that the murders had likely occurred between 10 and 11 p.m. the previous evening. Hopeful that the evidence recovered from the crime scene might yield some clue to the killer's identity, detectives brought it to the Albany Police Crime Lab. While processing the bloody pot believed to have been used as a weapon, Detective Dean Halprin noticed what appeared to be a fingerprint on the inside wall. And if it was in fact a print, recovering it would not be easy.
The material the pot was made out of isn't something that we've had good results with because it has pockmarks, depressions, plus it's very bent out of shape from being struck against the victims. But after it was actually processed with the powder, we could see that we had something in there. We had a print.
But the excitement was short-lived. Though investigators had found evidence that could place a suspect at the scene, they couldn't get the camera in the position necessary to obtain a detailed image. Without that, they would be unable to compare it to a suspect print, if and when one emerged.
The pot is small, difficult to stick a camera in and get a good picture. Numerous attempts were made at doing that. And we had pictures of the print, but they were not of the quality needed to make an identification.
Examiners concluded that any attempt to lift the print with adhesive would likely destroy it. And dismantling the murder weapon was not an option.
I think they'll be able to.
As evidence, the print appeared to be useless.
Thanks.
Investigators would have to find another way to identify the killer. Police turned to Josephine Zurich's son-in-law, Gary Lang, for help. After listening to him describe his mother-in-law, police couldn't imagine why anyone would have wanted to harm her.
Josephine Zurich was an 86-year-old Polish immigrant who had lived in that home, raised her family there since she immigrated to the United States. She was a law-abiding citizen. Everyone in the neighborhood knew her. She was known for baking pies for people in the neighborhood.
The son-in-law added that Walter Paskowski, a tenant in the house, had also become close to Josephine and the family. Gary said that he and his wife stopped by the boarding house regularly, bringing groceries and offering to help out as often as they could. He recalled that Josephine had recently had problems with one of the younger tenants who rented the basement apartment.
I don't know.
In fact, she had started legal eviction proceedings against him when he suddenly moved out of the building. The son-in-law provided investigators with the former tenant's name. A records check revealed that the man currently worked as a cook at a hotel restaurant in the Albany Capital District. Believing they had identified a suspect in the killings, investigators quickly contacted the former tenant and arranged to speak with him. At first, he appeared apprehensive and seemed reluctant to answer any questions. But when police informed him about the murders, he decided to cooperate. He admitted that he moved out after having run-ins with Josephine and Walter. But he insisted he would never harm either of them. On the night of the murders, he claimed he had been working late at the restaurant. Homicide detective Bernard Santandrea began digging deeper into the former tenant's background. But nothing he learned indicated that the young man could be involved in such a brutal double homicide.
This was an horrific act of violence. We just didn't feel this man had this in his nature to do it. Now, that being said, we also verified his whereabouts and his place of employment, and was verified that during the time we felt the homicides occurred, this individual was working.
The investigation was back at square one. With no suspects in the savage double murders, the case threatened to go cold. And that meant a violent killer was still loose on the streets of Albany. Police in Albany, New York struggled to solve a brutal double homicide at a boarding house that had claimed the lives of the owner, 86-year-old Josephine Zurich, and 55-year-old tenant Walter Paskowski. Though forensic examiners had located a suspect's fingerprint on a cooking pot used to bludgeon the victims, attempts to recover it had been unsuccessful. Homicide detective Anthony Bruno struggled to identify the killer.
We really had a whodunit. These folks had no connections to any wrongdoings, or they were not criminal element. It was difficult to figure out who would have a motive to savagely beat these two people to death, aside from the burglary, which we believed happened.
Police turned to the public for help. 2 days after the murders, a woman contacted detectives. After reading the details of the crime in the local paper, she believed that her ex-boyfriend might be involved in the homicides. Around midnight on the evening of the murders, the woman's ex-boyfriend, Johnny Blanchard, had stopped by her apartment unannounced. He seemed agitated and was sweating and out of breath. The girlfriend noticed blood on his clothes. Johnny explained he had been injured in a fight. But as he changed out of the bloody clothes, there were no injuries visible on his body. He refused to answer any more of her questions and left. She hadn't heard from him since. Johnny Blanchard was well known to Homicide Detective Sergeant Bernard Santandrea. He had an extensive criminal record, which included drug charges and violent assaults.
Johnny Blanchard was familiar to me and other investigators in the office. We've known him over the years, knew that he had a propensity for violence, that he would be the type of personality that could commit such a crime.
Blanchard's records revealed that he had grown up in a house close to where the murders occurred. And he was rumored to be currently squatting in an abandoned home located next door to the victim's residence. Police believed they had finally identified a suspect in the murders. Now they needed to find Johnny Blanchard. His photograph was distributed to all area patrol officers. The following evening, Albany police spotted Johnny Blanchard hanging out near a downtown alley. He was placed under arrest and brought in to speak with homicide detectives. Under questioning, Blanchard was arrogant and uncooperative. He denied knowing the victims and insisted he had no information about the murders. After requesting that a lawyer be present, he asked to make a phone call.
After a few hours of questioning, Johnny finally asked if he could call his former girlfriend on the telephone, and he wanted to speak to her before he spoke any further to us.
Blanchard wanted to find out what his ex-girlfriend had told police. But while he was on the phone, he was overheard admitting that he had stolen a television and some jewelry from the boarding house. When police confronted the suspect with the information, his attorney showed up. And he refused to allow his client to answer any more questions. Though police had overheard a partial confession, they knew it would never be allowed in as evidence in a murder trial. Still, it gave them an opportunity. The owner of the vacant house where Blanchard had been squatting allowed investigators to search the property. There, they recovered a television set and some jewelry that was later identified as belonging to victim Josephine Zurich. Though convinced of Johnny Blanchard's guilt, investigators knew their case was still only circumstantial. To prove murder, they needed hard evidence that could place the suspect at the scene of the crime. Though a fingerprint had been located on one of the murder weapons, police had been unable to get a clear image of the print. Investigators turned to forensic experts at the Connecticut State Police Crime Lab. There, specialist Paul Penders agreed to work the case. After examining the print inside the pot, he realized there would be only one way to get Albany police the evidence they needed to make their case.
We knew that there were some difficulties with lifting the print, it being a blood print and so forth, and it would have to be pretty much done off the photography. The comparison would have to be made with a photograph.
But that was easier said than done. Penders would have to find a way to precisely place a camera inside the pot in order to generate a clear image of the evidence.
This impression is inside the pot, in the side of the pot, and we need to get a photograph of it straight down from 90 degrees to produce an actual size photograph. You couldn't get a conventional camera in that.
Then, Penders had an idea. Though modern cameras could not be manipulated into the position needed, older cameras could. He decided to use a 19th century bellows camera, which was constructed using what is called a slide rail system. The slide rail allows the lens to be moved or slid into place, detached from the body of the camera. The system allows for greater access to images that are in hard-to-reach locations. Penders was able to slide his lens directly over the latent fingerprint. The film is another key component of the process. Each frame of film is 4 inches by 5 inches, much larger than the standard 35mm width.
The major advantage of the 4x5 camera is you photograph the object already its exact size. So it's already life size. There's no question about enlarging it or reducing it. And the amount of information on that large piece of film far surpasses what a 35mm frame can give you.
The procedure was successful. Using his bellows camera with the slide rail system, Paul Penders was able to get a high-contrast photograph of the fingerprint inside the pot. Now, examiners looked to the evidence to prove that Johnny Blanchard had carried out the murders. When the print photographed from inside the pot was compared with known fingerprints taken from Blanchard, examiners concluded they were identical.
Is that our man there?
Johnny Blanchard was subsequently charged with 2 counts of murder. Based on the evidence, investigators believe that Johnny Blanchard broke into the boarding house intent on robbing the place. But when 86-year-old Josephine Zurich and 55-year-old Walter Paskowski interrupted the burglary, Blanchard reacted by savagely beating them to death. Johnny Blanchard was found guilty of 2 counts of murder, depraved indifference, and burglary. He was sentenced to 60 years to life. Suspects with no obvious connections to their victims are difficult to identify. But oftentimes, murders are carried out by those closest to the victim. Just across the Mississippi state line, the Pearl River in southeastern Louisiana is known to sport fishermen as a haven for largemouth bass. On May 21, 1996, a man headed toward the river in search of a perfect fishing spot. As he made his way through a small clearing, he discovered a decomposed human body. The fishermen quickly summoned police. Within minutes, officers and forensic technicians from the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Department arrived at the location. Before they began processing the scene, however, crime scene photographers thoroughly documented the entire area. And it was a mess. Investigators found dozens of personal papers and letters scattered around a wide area. An empty backpack lay nearby. The female victim had been beaten and stabbed once in the neck. Officers combed the area looking for clues to the victim's identity. But other than the letters, they found nothing. The unidentified woman was transported to the coroner's office for autopsy. Though the body had decayed beyond recognition, the medical examiner determined that the victim was a Caucasian woman, approximately 5 feet 7 inches tall, and likely between the ages of 35 and 45. She had been dead less than a week. Cause of death was a single stab wound to the neck, resulting in a laceration of the right carotid artery. Detectives at the St. Tammany Parish Sheriff's Department began the process of trying to identify the murder victim. Captain David Hall didn't have much information to work with.
First thing we did was basically get a measurement of the body and try to come up with an idea of what this individual looked like in a living state. We checked missing person files for the Mississippi and Louisiana area. Came up with nothing that fit the script of this young lady.
Investigators began sifting through the papers for clues. All of the correspondences were addressed to a woman named Liz, and they were all signed Michael Packer. His return address was located less than 100 miles away in Biloxi, Mississippi. Biloxi police were contacted and dispatched to the address where the letters had originated. Michael Packer was not there. According to his roommate, Packer had left several days earlier to work a job somewhere in Alabama. When questioned further, he stated that he knew a woman named Liz. Her full name was Elizabeth Herdman, and until recently, she and Michael Packer had been romantically involved. The roommate said that Liz and Michael fought constantly, mostly about money. In fact, a few weeks before, one of their arguments threatened to turn violent, prompting the roommate to call police. But rather than suffer in a violent relationship, Liz packed her belongings into a backpack and left. The roommate believed Liz was currently homeless, but he had seen her less than a week ago looking for work at a local employment agency. Hoping to confirm the victim's identity, Louisiana police ran a records check on Elizabeth Herdman. Investigators learned that the 39-year-old woman had been arrested on minor charges several years earlier in Florida, and her fingerprints were on file. When those were compared to the prints lifted from the victim, police found a perfect match. Police had identified the woman found murdered along the shores of the Pearl River. And her ex-boyfriend, who left town around the time of her murder, was the prime suspect. Now, investigators needed to find him. Police in St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, had identified a woman found murdered near a riverbank as 39-year-old Elizabeth Herdman. To find her killer, investigators began retracing her movements in the days leading up to the murder. Louisiana police traveled to the employment agency in nearby Biloxi, Mississippi, where the homeless woman was last seen alive. The manager there confirmed that Liz Herdman had been in looking for work on May 18th, 3 days before her body was discovered. and Liz had not come in alone that day. According to the records, she had signed in with two men, Arthur Cyber and Alfred Huntsman, and a woman named Felice Fisher. The manager had seen the group together before and knew them to be friends. The manager also confirmed that Michael Packer, Liz Herdman's ex-boyfriend and the prime suspect in her murder, had signed in earlier that same day. But by the time Liz and her friends arrived, he had already left for a job in Mobile, Alabama.
10 minutes and I'll be coming your way.
Investigators were able to confirm that Packer was several hundred miles away when the murder occurred. Since Liz Herdman had been homeless at the time of her death, identifying a suspect would not be easy.
She's living on the street. Anyone could be the suspect. She comes across people capable of committing homicide on a daily basis.
Captain Hall began tracking down Liz's three friends, hopeful they could provide information. But a background check revealed that two of those friends, Alfred Huntsman and Arthur Cyber, had extensive criminal records, which included robbery and assault charges. Detectives traveled to a nearby motel where Arthur Cyber had recently been staying. Though he was no longer there, a motel employee remembered Cyber well. He had been staying in a room with two women and another man. One of the women matched Liz Herdman's description. The employee remembered that after the group checked out, she cleaned their room. It looked like there had been a violent struggle. The window had been broken, and there were stains on the bedspread that appeared to be blood. The motel employee hadn't seen anyone from that group around since, and they hadn't left a forwarding address. The information led investigators to now believe that Liz Herdman's friends were involved in her murder. An APB was immediately issued for the three individuals and the car they were believed to be driving.
We wanted to alert the nation that we were looking for Arthur Cyber and Alfred Huntsman and Felice Fisher for questioning reference to this homicide.
A few days later, police several hundred miles away in Hutchins, Texas, spotted the three suspects. They were taken into custody and transported to Louisiana for questioning. Police searched their vehicle and collected its contents, including 6 pairs of shoes, some papers, and a few articles of clothing. Under questioning, Alfred Huntsman admitted that he had information about the murder. Huntsman said that while the 4 friends were staying at the motel, Liz Herdman and Arthur Cyber had gotten into an argument. Liz had recently gotten a job, and Cyber wanted some of her money to buy drugs and alcohol. When she refused, Cyber smashed out the window and became physically abusive. Eventually, things calmed down, and a short while later, Cyber suggested that they all go into town. But according to Huntsman, Cyber drove the group to an isolated spot at the Pearl River. He said he wanted to go for a walk with Liz to privately apologize for his behavior at the motel. Several minutes later, Arthur Cyber emerged from the woods, alone and covered with blood. He had murdered Liz, and the motive was robbery. Cyber threatened to kill him and Felice Fisher if they went to authorities. Huntsman insisted he and Felice never left the vehicle. When confronted with the statement, Arthur Cyber denied the accusation. Though he had been present at the river when the murder occurred, he said that it was Alfred Huntsman and Felice Fisher who carried out the homicide.
Elizabeth, your girlfriend?
Right off the bat, one started giving up the other, pointing the finger, and that at least lets us know that we've got the three parties responsible. And from there, you just start to meticulously break down the lies that they're giving you and ultimately end up with the truth.
For answers, investigators forwarded all of the evidence to forensic examiners at the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. It was now up to them to find a way to prove which of the suspects had viciously killed Elizabeth Herdman.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
Police in St. Tammany Parish, Louisiana, had 3 suspects in custody for the murder of 39-year-old Elizabeth Herdman. But with the suspects pointing the finger at each other, investigators needed to find a way to expose the killer's identity. They turned to examiners at the Louisiana State Police Crime Lab. There, forensic scientist George Shiro began scrutinizing the evidence collected from the crime scene. He focused his attention on a yellow piece of paper stained with the victim's blood. As he examined it more closely, he noticed a shoe print. On its own, he realized that the print would not be enough to establish the killer's identity. Though all 3 suspects admitted being at the Pearl River, each denied being near the victim when the murder occurred. To determine who was lying, Shiro first needed to know where the evidence was found in relation to the victim's body. For that, he turned to the crime scene photographs. In the photos, he observed several yellow pieces of paper. But after digitizing and enlarging the photographs, he saw that only one was stained with blood, and it was located just inches away from the victim's head. Now, Shiro looked to determine which of the suspects had left the print. He began by comparing the shoes recovered from the suspect's vehicle to the shoe print found within inches of Liz Herdman's body. He quickly eliminated 5 of the 6 pairs. But the tread on the remaining pair appeared to be similar to the print from the crime scene.
So I examined that shoe more carefully, and what we look for when we're examining shoe prints is we look for random markings on the soles of the shoe that give these shoes their individuality.
Shiro generated an impression of the shoe print found in the suspect's car onto a sheet of clear acetate paper. When that was overlaid on top of the bloody print recovered from the crime scene, he found one consistency after another.
That is an aha moment. That's when we say, okay, we have a match here. We have enough marks to individualize this shoe print to this shoe.
Police determined that the shoe that had left the print belonged to Alfred Huntsman. And Shiro's findings proved that he was within inches of the victim as her blood was shed, something he had previously denied. Confronted with the evidence, Huntsman confessed to taking part in the crime. But he insisted he hadn't worked alone. He said that he, Arthur Cyber, and Felice Fisher had driven Elizabeth Herdman to the clearing off of the remote road near the river with the intent to rob her. But the robbery spiraled out of control, and when Liz fought back, Arthur Cyber stabbed her in the neck. Huntsman admitted that he beat the victim while Cyber killed her. Polygraph tests later confirmed that all 3 suspects had participated in Elizabeth Herdman's murder. Arthur Cyber was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Alfred Huntsman received the same sentence. Felice Fisher pled guilty to accessory after the fact for first-degree murder and for second-degree kidnapping. She was sentenced to 25 years in prison. Most killers look to strike when their targets are isolated or far away from potential witnesses. When investigators struggle to identify a suspect, they turn to forensic examiners who can expose a killer's guilt caught in the camera's eye.